No one in that bank could have imagined what was about to unfold. When the old black man walked in, his tattered coat hanging from his frail shoulders, shoes barely intact, and that worn-out canvas bag clutched by his side, whispers rippled through the room. People exchanged smug glances, amused by what they assumed was just another poor wanderer who had stumbled into the wrong place. But he wasn't lost. He had come with a purpose. Inside that old bag wasn't garbage or scraps. It carried a secret, a truth buried for over half a century, a truth so powerful, so devastating that once revealed would shake the very core of this institution. The staff didn't know, the security guard didn't know, even the powerful men running this bank had no idea their darkest secret was about to come crashing down right in front of them. Stay right here, because what you're about to witness isn't just one man's story. It's a battle for truth, for justice, and for a stolen legacy finally brought into the light. And once this truth is revealed, no one in that room will ever be the same again. Before we dive into this unbelievable story, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel, because stories like this deserve to be told. Now, let's begin. The heavy glass doors of Chase Bank slowly swung open, and the soft jingle of the bell barely registered under the murmur of conversations inside. Heads turned. Conversations faded. In walked the old man. His name was Elijah Kirby. His dark, weathered skin told a story of countless sunlit days and sleepless nights. His unkempt silver hair glistened under the bank's bright fluorescent lights. The long brown coat he wore was patched in several places, faded from years of wear. His steps were slow but steady, every movement deliberate, and slung over his shoulder a faded canvas bag, rough, heavy, and strangely out of place in the polished marble lobby. The air inside the bank shifted the moment he entered. Whispers started. A woman clutched her designer purse a little closer. Two young bank tellers exchanged smirks and low, mocking comments. Who let this guy in? One snickered. Must have wandered in from the street, the other replied. The employees didn't bother lowering their voices. They were sure the old man wouldn't dare confront them. Elijah heard every word, but he said nothing. He kept walking, slow, steady, toward the center of the lobby, directly beneath the massive Chase Bank logo that towered above him like a monument to power. Customers stared, some amused, others annoyed. To them, he was nothing more than a poor old man disturbing their polished world. Then, from the corner of the lobby, a large security guard stepped forward. Stephen Miller, tall, muscular, white, known throughout the bank for his quick temper and heavy hand. Stephen's eyes narrowed as he scanned Elijah from head to toe with thinly veiled contempt. His hand, casually, rested on the gun holstered at his side, a silent, threatening gesture. The tension in the air thickened. Elijah paused. He lifted his head and slowly scanned every pair of eyes watching him. The sneers, the whispers, the arrogance. He took a deep breath. And then, in a voice both gentle and unnervingly steady, he spoke. "This bank is mine." The words echoed through the marble lobby. At first there was silence, then laughter. The sound rolled through the building like thunder, mocking, cruel. A chorus of disbelief erupted from employees and customers alike. "This bank is his? What is he talking about?" Poor old fool must have lost his mind. Stephen shook his head and took a step closer. His voice was loud, sharp, full of authority. "All right, old man, that's enough. This isn't a shelter or soup kitchen. You need to leave. Now." But Elijah didn't move, didn't blink, didn't waver. Instead, his voice came again, just as calm, but now with steel beneath the words. "I'm not leaving. I've come to reclaim what was stolen from me over 50 years ago." The laughter faded. Now there was confusion. Unease, eyes darted from person to person, the mocking smiles began to falter. From behind the main counter, the bank manager finally emerged, James Temp, well-dressed, young, clean-cut, the epitome of Chase Bank's corporate polish. His tone was rehearsed, professional, but his eyes gleamed with quiet condescension. "Sir," he began, forcing a smile, "I think you must be confused. This bank has been owned by the Matthews family for generations. Perhaps you're thinking of another institution." Elijah's gaze remained locked on James, unwavering. "No, I am not mistaken." Then, with slow, deliberate movements, he lowered the canvas bag from his shoulder and gently placed it on the polished marble floor. "The proof is right here." And as his hand reached for the frayed strings of the bag, the atmosphere inside Chase Bank shifted yet again. The laughter was gone now. Only silence remained. Everyone held their breath, because whatever was inside that old bag was about to change. Everything. The frayed canvas straps slowly loosened beneath Elijah's weathered fingers, the knot untied with care, not because his hands were weak, but because the weight of what he carried demanded respect. The crowd leaned forward, almost involuntarily. Even Stephen Miller, whose hand still hovered near his holster, felt the strange gravity of the moment. Elijah parted the mouth of the old bag, and then bundles of money began to appear, old, yellowed, fragile. The faded Chase Bank logo printed on each bill was unmistakable, but it was a logo none of them had seen before, not on any modern currency, not on any corporate record. It was the Chase Bank logo from more than 50 years ago. Gasps rippled through the lobby, whispers swirled like a rising wind. The customers, once so eager to mock, now stood frozen, their smug expressions melting into confusion and fear. Stephen took an instinctive step backward, his fingers twitched at his side. He glanced at James Temp, silently begging for a cue, but James, pale now, said nothing. Elijah reached into the bag once more and pulled out an object even more powerful than the money itself. A ledger, thick, heavy, its leather cover cracked and worn with age. Embossed. Faintly across its face were the words, "Chase Bank Ledger, 1948. James Temp swallowed hard. Elijah's voice was calm, but carried the weight of decades. "This is the original ledger, my ledger. The day I founded this bank. My name is written inside, my partner's as well, John Williams." The name struck the room like a distant rumble of thunder. John Williams, a name tied to the Matthews family, to the very foundations of Chase Bank as they knew it. James could feel his legs weaken beneath him, his polished world, the bank, his career, the legacy of the Matthews family was beginning to crack. "You see," Elijah continued softly, "this bank was mine, until greed and hatred stole it from me." Stephen tried to regain control, his voice rising sharply as if volume alone could force the world back into order. "You expect us to believe that? That some old man, some drifter, owned Chase Bank? This is absurd." But his voice no longer held the authority it once did. It cracked under the weight of the evidence piled before him, and even his hand, still resting on his holster, trembled. Slightly, Elijah's eyes pierced him. "I am not here to convince you with words. I have brought you the truth, and the truth doesn't care whether you believe it." His words hung in the air, slicing through the thick silence. At that moment, James Temp, for the first time, stepped forward, drawn by something deeper than duty. His hand reached for the ledger. His fingers brushed its surface like one might touch a fragile relic of history. He opened it slowly, scanning the handwritten pages, the business records, the personal notes, the signatures, and there it was, Elijah C.K. Kirby, written in careful, steady ink. James froze. His breath caught. The name was real, the ledger was real, and everything he thought he knew, everything this institution was built upon, was suddenly uncertain. The whispers among the staff grew louder now. Confusion, Fear, doubt. Stephen clenched his jaw, watching James's face pale as the undeniable truth stared back at him from the brittle pages. But Elijah, standing firm in the center of the storm, was calm. He had waited 50 years for this moment, and now the storm was only just beginning. The whispers were now uncontrollable. From corner to corner, the once pristine lobby buzzed like a hive, fear, disbelief, and the weight of an uncomfortable reality filling every breath. James Temp stood frozen. His fingers gripped the ancient ledger as though it might slip from his hands. He could feel every eye turning toward him, waiting for him to say something, anything. Stephen Miller's voice sliced through the tension. "James," he said sharply, his tone increasingly desperate. "You're not buying this, are you?" His hand, still resting dangerously close to his holster, trembled slightly. But it wasn't confidence that made it tremble now. It was uncertainty. James opened his mouth, but no words came. He flipped through the brittle pages once more, as if praying that somewhere in those old sheets of faded ink he might find a reason to deny what was becoming painfully obvious. The signatures, the deposits, the founding agreements, they were all there, and they were undeniably real. "Stephen," James finally managed, his voice cracking, "these documents, they're authentic." The words hung in the air like a stone dropped into a still lake. Ripples of shock spread instantly through the crowd. Stephen's face twisted in defiance. He took one aggressive step forward, raising his voice as though shouting might change the facts. "It doesn't matter how old those papers are. You think you can trust this old man? He's manipulating us. This bank belongs to the Matthews family. It always has. This is fraud." Elijah didn't flinch. His calm presence was beginning to suffocate Stephen more than any argument ever could. "Mr. Miller," Elijah said softly, "you're not afraid of fraud. You're afraid of truth. And truth doesn't bend for anyone, not even for the Matthews family." The words struck Stephen like a blow. Around them, the customers, once smug observers, now shifted uncomfortably. They no longer knew which side to believe. But the weight of the documents, the calm of Elijah, and the trembling of their once confident manager left little doubt growing in their hearts. James' voice strengthened as he spoke again. "Stephen, this man has brought evidence we cannot ignore. If what he says is true..." He paused, swallowing his guilt. "Then everything we thought we knew about Chase Bank is a lie." Stephen's hand gripped the holster tighter now, not from duty, but from desperation. He was a man watching his entire sense of order unravel. "This is dangerous, James," he barked. "You're going to tear this place apart over a story, over some old man?" "No." James's voice was steady now. "The lie tore it apart long ago. We've just been living inside its ruins." The lobby went still again. It was no longer about bank ownership, no longer about Elijah or James or Stephen. It was about something far greater, the slow, painful collision of history and conscience. And at its center stood Elijah C.K. Kirby, patient, dignified, unshaken. The storm was no longer brewing. It had arrived. The whispers were now uncontrollable. From corner to corner, the once pristine lobby buzzed like a hive, fear, disbelief, and the weight of an uncomfortable reality filling every breath. James Temp stood frozen. His fingers gripped the ancient ledger as though it might slip from his hands. He could feel every eye turning toward him, waiting for him to say something, anything. Stephen Miller's voice sliced through the tension. "James," he said sharply, his tone increasingly desperate, "you're not buying this, are you?" His hand, still resting dangerously close to his holster, trembled slightly. But it wasn't confidence that made it tremble now. It was uncertainty. James opened his mouth, but no words came. He flipped through the brittle pages once more, as if praying that somewhere in those old sheets of faded ink he might find a reason to deny what was becoming painfully obvious. The signatures, the deposits, the founding agreements, they were all there, and they were undeniably real. Stephen, James finally managed, his voice cracking. These documents, they're authentic. The words hung in the air like a stone dropped into a still lake. Ripples of shock spread instantly through the crowd. Stephen's face twisted in defiance. He took one aggressive step forward, raising his voice as though shouting might change the facts. It doesn't matter how old those papers are. You think you can trust this old man? He's manipulating us. This bank belongs to the Matthews family. It always has. This is fraud. Elijah didn't flinch. His calm presence was beginning to suffocate Stephen more than any argument ever could. Mr. Miller, Elijah said softly, you're not afraid of fraud. You're afraid of truth. And truth doesn't bend for anyone, not even for the Matthews family. The words struck Stephen like a blow. Around them, the customers, once smug observers, now shifted uncomfortably. They no longer knew which side to believe, but the weight of the documents, the calm of Elijah, and the trembling of their once confident manager left little doubt growing in their hearts. James' voice strengthened as he spoke again. Stephen, this man has brought evidence we cannot ignore. If what he says is true— He paused, swallowing his guilt. Then everything we thought we knew about Chase Bank is a lie. Stephen's hand gripped the holster tighter now, not from duty, but from desperation. He was a man watching his entire sense of order unravel. This is dangerous, James, he barked. You're going to tear this place apart over a story, over some old man? No. James's voice was steady now. The lie tore it apart long ago. We've just been living inside its ruins. The lobby went still again. It was no longer about bank ownership, no longer about Elijah or James or Stephen. It was about something far greater, the slow, painful collision of history and conscience. And at its center stood Elijah C.K. Kirby, patient, dignified, unshaken. The storm was no longer brewing. It had arrived. News spread faster than anyone inside the Chase Bank lobby could have imagined. By the next morning, the name Elijah Kirby was no longer just whispered in one small branch. It was echoing across Rockview, then the state, and then the nation. The story of a forgotten black founder, a man erased by greed, buried under layers of generational power, captured the attention of every media outlet. Headlines blared, "The bank the black man built and was robbed of." 50 years of silence, the hidden owner of Chase Bank. Cameras swarmed the bank's entrance. Journalists gathered outside James Temp's office. Protesters held signs reading, "Justice for Elijah." But not everyone welcomed the storm. Inside, a tall glass tower far above the streets of Rockview, sat the Matthews family. For generations, they had ruled over Chase Bank like royalty, their wealth, power, and reputation built on what Elijah had once created. Now, their empire teetered. At the head of the long oak conference table sat Gerald Matthews, the patriarch. His silver hair glistened under the chandelier, his piercing blue eyes cold and calculating. "He's nothing but an old man with a sob story," Gerald hissed. His advisors exchanged nervous glances. "With respect, sir. The evidence is undeniable. The documents match. The ledger, it's authentic." Gerald slammed his palm on the table, his voice booming through the boardroom. "Then discredit him?" A long pause filled the room. One of the younger lawyers, his voice hesitant, finally spoke. "We've tried. His story is bulletproof. Every record matches his claim. And—" The lawyer swallowed. "Public opinion is turning hard." Gerald leaned back, breathing heavily. "Then we fight," his voice lowered to a growl. "We bury him, legally, financially. We make this lawsuit last until that old man is back in the grave where he belongs." The room fell silent. The Matthews family had just declared war. Back at the bank, James Temp sat in his office, reviewing the newest legal threats delivered that morning. Cease and desist. libel claims, defamation suits, financial blackmail. Every paper reeked of the Matthews family's desperation. James sighed, rubbing his temples, but then came a knock on his door. It was Emily Carter. Behind her, Elijah stood, calm, composed, but carrying decades of weight in his eyes. "They've made their move," James said, gesturing to the pile of legal documents. Elijah nodded slowly. "As we expected." James looked up, locking eyes with him. "They're going to drag this into court. Years, maybe decades." Elijah's reply was quiet, but unbreakable. "Then we stand for decades, however long it takes." James exhaled deeply, then smiled faintly. "We started this together. We finish it together." Behind them, Emily quietly added, "And you're not alone. We're all standing with you now." Outside the bank, crowds gathered. Some came in protest, some came in support. But all of Rockview understood. The old world was cracking, and this fight was no longer just about one man's stolen bank. It was about something far larger. Reckoning. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The courtroom had now become the stage for a battle unlike anything Rockview had ever seen. Inside the grand courthouse, towering marble columns loomed over the legal war unfolding between Elijah Kirby and the Matthews dynasty. At one end of the courtroom sat Elijah, his weathered face calm, his hands resting gently on the same worn canvas bag that had carried his truth for so many years. Next to him, James Temp. Emily Carter, Josh, and a growing legal team who had volunteered, inspired by Elijah's unbreakable fight. At the other end of the courtroom sat the Matthews family, Gerald Matthews, flanked by high-powered attorneys, private investigators, and hired experts. Their sole mission: destroy Elijah Kirby. The Matthews lawyers attacked mercilessly. They challenged every piece of evidence, every signature, every memory. They accused Elijah of fabricating documents, of senility, of seeking attention, of exploiting racial narratives for financial gain. Inside the packed courtroom, the tension was suffocating. One of Gerald's lead attorneys stood tall, voice dripping with arrogance. "Mr. Kirby, you expect this court to believe that for over 50 years you sat silent, and now, conveniently, you appear with your evidence. You were content to let history forget you until now?" The crowd murmured. Elijah raised his eyes, his voice calm, unwavering. "I didn't choose silence. Silence was forced on me. Doors were closed to me. Judges refused to hear me. Attorneys turned me away because of my skin. I wasn't silent. I was silenced." The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge sat back in his chair, absorbing the weight of Elijah's words. But the Matthews weren't done. Next came character assassinations, fabricated testimonies from long-retired board members, falsified reports, claiming Elijah had once mismanaged funds in the bank's early days. The Matthews strategy was simple: bury him beneath doubt. Night after night, the media swirled with controversy. Some headlines praised Elijah as a hero, others painted him as a bitter old man trying to rewrite history. The public was divided. But behind the scenes, the Matthews family had an even darker plan. One night, as James Temp was leaving his office, a black SUV pulled up beside him. A man in a suit stepped out, voice calm but menacing. "Walk away, Mr. Temp. You've done your part. You've earned the community's respect. But if you keep pushing, you're going to regret it, you, your family, and your precious Mr. Kirby." James froze. The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air. The Matthews weren't simply fighting a legal battle. They were willing to destroy lives. Back at Elijah's modest home, James shared everything. Elijah listened quietly. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "They've stolen everything from me once before." He looked up, his eyes filled with the quiet strength that had carried him for decades. "They will not steal my dignity." James's voice trembled. "But your safety, Elijah. They could let them come." Elijah's voice was iron. Not fighting me, James. They're fighting the truth, and the truth will not bow. Outside, Rockview was changing. More people, black, white, young, old, were rallying behind Elijah. Protesters lined the courthouse steps holding signs, "You can't silence history. Justice for Elijah. Truth doesn't expire." The Matthews family, once untouchable, was beginning to feel the cracks beneath their empire. But the storm was still building. The next courtroom session would be the most pivotal yet, because what came next would either bury Elijah forever or finally bring the empire crashing down. The courtroom buzzed with nervous tension as the next hearing began. Even those who once dismissed Elijah's claims now leaned forward in their seats. The judge entered. The gavel struck. The room fell into silence. Gerald Matthews sat with his attorneys, their faces calm, but behind their eyes, panic. They had spent decades crafting a flawless narrative, but Elijah Kirby's truth had already begun unraveling the threads. The Matthews team called their expert witness to the stand, a high-priced handwriting analyst flown in from out of state. He spoke confidently. "Your Honor, based on my professional analysis, the signatures attributed to Mr. Kirby on these documents," he paused for effect, "are highly suspicious. There are inconsistencies that suggest these may have been forged at a later date." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Elijah sat still. He had been here before, decades ago, when lies carried more weight than facts. But not this time. James Temp stood and calmly approached the bench. "Your Honor, may I present newly discovered evidence?" The judge raised an eyebrow. "Proceed, Mr. Temp." James walked over and carefully placed a thin, dusty leather folder on the exhibit table. This folder was located in the basement archives of Chase Bank, sealed, forgotten, untouched for over 50 years. Inside are the original film reels from 1948. The courtroom murmured again. James continued, "Contained on these reels is security footage from the original signing of Chase Bank's incorporation. Clear footage, with clear audio. Even Gerald Matthews paled. The Matthews family claimed these recordings were destroyed in a fire decades ago," James added. "But they weren't." The judge nodded. "Play the footage." A large screen lowered. The courtroom lights dimmed. The grainy black-and-white video flickered to life. There, on screen, sat a young Elijah Kirby, sitting at the original boardroom table. Next to him, John Williams. Behind them, the early founding, in partners. And then, clear as day, Elijah's voice rang out. "As co-founder and majority owner of Chase Bank, I hereby sign this agreement with full authority. My name is Elijah C.K. Kirby." The camera zoomed in as Elijah signed the founding documents, his signature bold and identical to the one now resting on the exhibits table. No forgery, no manipulation, just truth, frozen in time. The video continued, and then came the most devastating blow. In the corner of the frame, John Williams whispered to one of his attorneys, unaware the camera captured every word. "Once we push him out, Matthews will take full control. Kirby won't stand a chance in court, not in this town." The gasps in the courtroom now turned into a collective roar of shock. Gerald Matthews buried his face in his hands. The video stopped. The courtroom was dead silent. And then, for the first time since Elijah walked into Chase Bank with his old canvas, a bag, the judge spoke with full authority. "This court recognizes the overwhelming evidence in favor of Mr. Elijah C.K. Kirby. It is hereby ordered that all claims of ownership revert to Mr. Kirby immediately. Furthermore, criminal investigations against the Matthews family and Mr. John Williams's estate will proceed." The gavel came down with finality. The room erupted. Cheers, tears. Elijah closed his eyes as the weight of 70 years lifted off his chest. James Temp placed a steady hand on his shoulder. Emily Carter wept quietly nearby. Outside, the crowds gathered, their voices rising, "Justice for Elijah! Justice for Elijah!" But as the celebration swelled, Elijah remained calm, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't win. The truth did." And yet, as he stepped outside into the blinding afternoon light, he knew that his battle had just rewritten history for himself, for those who would come after him, and for every soul who was ever told to stay silent. The sun hung high above Rockview as Elijah Kirby stood outside the courthouse. The crowd that had once dismissed him now surrounded him with admiration and respect. Reporters pushed forward, microphones extended, eager for a soundbite. But Elijah, steady as always, spoke softly. "This isn't about me. This is about truth, and truth always waits for its moment." Behind him, James Temp gave a brief statement to the cameras. His voice strong, no longer the man trapped between duty and conscience. "We can no longer afford to live in a world where lies shape our institutions. What happened to Mr. Kirby was not only an injustice against him, it was an injustice against the very foundation of this bank, this town, this country." The reporters captured every word. The town, once shielded by decades of carefully manufactured history, now watched its foundation crumble under the undeniable weight of facts. Emily Carter stood nearby, her eyes gleaming with quiet pride. She had once been too afraid to speak, but today her courage had added one more voice to the chorus that broke generations of silence. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Elijah began walking toward the small bus stop down the street. He had no interest in the press, in headlines, or in the spectacle. Unfolding behind him, all he ever wanted was peace. James caught up to him. "Mr. Kirby." "Elijah, you've changed everything." Elijah smiled faintly. "No, son. We simply pulled back the curtain. The truth was always there, waiting to be seen." James hesitated, then asked the question that had been haunting him. "Was it worth it? After all these years? After everything you lost?" Elijah paused. He turned his eyes toward the horizon. "It's never too late to reclaim dignity. You see, James, money can be stolen, power can be seized, but truth is patient. It doesn't age, it doesn't wither, it waits until someone is brave enough to carry it forward." The bus approached in the distance. James extended his hand. Elijah shook it firmly. "Thank you for standing with me," Elijah said, his voice warm. "You didn't have to, but you did, and that makes all the difference." James watched as the bus doors opened and Elijah stepped inside, taking a seat by the window. The bus pulled away, leaving behind not just a courthouse, but an entire town that would never view its past the same way again. The camera of life panned upward. The town's skyline stood under the bright afternoon sun, no longer casting shadows long enough to hide the lies it once protected, and somewhere, deep in the heart of Rockview, a new chapter had begun. Elijah Kirby's story is not just about one man's fight. It's about the power of standing firm against injustice, even when the world tries to silence you. What would you do if your truth was buried for decades? Would you keep fighting? Leave your thoughts in the comments. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us all: justice delayed is never justice denied.